to the Ophthalmology Business Podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindset, and more. I'm Dr. David Lazar, one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of the podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy at www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Margot Goodkin, MD, PhD, board-certified ophthalmologist, PhD holder in microbiology, and leader in the pharmaceutical industry, about the importance of flexibility in career development, practical lessons from ophthalmology work in government, industry, and academics. Let's jump in. Just to start our conversation, I'd just like to say that Margot is an employee of AbbVie, and that any opinions or thoughts that she shares during this podcast is of hers alone and does not represent any formal opinion of the company she works for. Margot, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Great.
So you have one of these intimidatingly impressive career paths and resumes. I think that a good place to start would just briefly walk us through medical school, residency, fellowship, and then we'll pause really quickly from after fellowship to your first job, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Hard to be brief about that, but I will try. And thank you for the kind words. So I went to medical school after taking some time off after going to college. I had when I was in college, I actually was an environmental studies and biology major with a geology minor, and my plan was to be a friend of the earth and, environmental warrior, protecting the earth from the ravages of humanity. And so I took 3 years off after college before going to medical school. And the first year I spent working for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in the Waters Division, and I really enjoyed it. But I got this opportunity to go back to doing research I had done in college. I did angiogenesis research for a few years in college, and I got an opportunity to work in the lab of the person that I had been affiliated with when I was in college, but now at the University of Minnesota, and subsequently in his own separate research lab. He was a vascular surgeon, so angiogenesis was his research interest. So I spent a couple of years in that lab before I went to medical school. And then when I went to medical school, I did an MD PhD program because research obviously was an interest of mine. So I was a little older when I got to medical school compared to many of my classmates who had gone straight from college. And there was a small cohort of us who were the old guys in that class. And so in medical school, the MD PhD program, you do 2 years of medical school, then you do your PhD, and then you go back to medical school. And so in the beginning of my course through 8 years of never seeing the sunlight, I thought that I was going to go into dermatology. So I went from environmental studies to angiogenesis, and now I'm here in dermatology. And so I did a PhD on herpes virus. It was the most interesting thing that I had done in the rotations. You have to try out a few labs before you find your home. And so I chose herpes, which was no end of amusement for my friends. But so I did my PhD. It did take 4 years. I was fortunate in that I didn't have to go much longer than that. And then when I came back to my rotations, I was even older than everybody else. And I discovered doing the rotations that I really found ophthalmology interesting. It hadn't occurred to me before that ophthalmology was something I might want to do. But as it turns out, as you know, herpes virus is actually important in ophthalmology as well as dermatology. And so I ended up applying for ophthalmology, and I did my residency at the University of Pennsylvania's Shea Eye Institute. Shea was my choice because it was heavy on research. It had huge research funding at that time. It was one of the top ones for research funding. So I thought, I'm gonna be that unique MD PhD who does research while they're in residency. And that was absolutely not the case. Residency was super busy, and there was just no time for me to do research. I did, I would say, approximately a day and a half of actual laboratory research during my entire residency. So, but I did my residency, and when I was coming out of it, I originally, again, went into it thinking that I was probably going to do oculoplastics because I love those surgeries. I thought they were really interesting. And I came out doing a glaucoma fellowship instead. So big change from oculoplastics, but I discovered as I was going through that I do like oculoplastics, but I liked the glaucoma patients and the disease state more. So I did a fellowship.
Margot, I want to just stop really quickly because I'm already noticing a trend in your career path, and I think it's worth noting because we've had the luxury of speaking about you prior to this conversation. So it's just so interesting that what I admire about you is that you seem to pivot. You thought you wanted to do plastics, you thought you wanted to do derm, you went and tried it, or something else came up, and you said, "Oh, actually, I like glaucoma. Actually, I like ophthalmology." And it just has happened in this discussion already. I think I've heard about 5 examples of you doing that. And I just want to point out how unique it is. I don't know if you know how unique it is, but so many people, including myself, can get so tunnel vision, can be so one-sided in their goal. Like I'm going to do dermatology. And even if I came across evidence that maybe it's not the best fit, or maybe this would be better. There have been periods in my life where I didn't have such a broad view, and I have gotten into trouble that way. And I think that part of the reason why you're so successful is that you're able to kind of have take in new information and change your mind rapidly. Is that something that you think you're kind of cognizant of, or do you think that is that something you learned to do, or what do you think about that?
You know what, David? I think that's a really good insight because I think it is absolutely true. My entire career path has been a series of pivots, not necessarily that I knew at the time was going to have a lifelong impact on me, but done because I knew I didn't want to do the other thing. So I pivoted towards something that I thought I might like, but wasn't positive it was going to be the thing. So yes, it has been a very twisty road for me. And I think, like you were saying, many people, they set out on a road. They know that that road has A to B to C to D, and they follow that. Some people know exactly what they want to do from the age of 10. I was never that person. I was kind of figuring it out as I went along, and I was pivoting, and I have been pivoting. When I came out of fellowship, I was at a crossroads where I was trying to decide between 2 vastly different options. I was either going to be the only glaucoma specialist for a huge referral academic center, or go to the FDA. And I found this FDA position, I think, on the ARVO website, and I was tearing myself apart thinking about which one do I want, which do I want. And I came to a place where I said, well, you know what? I love research. I know that. I don't know if I'm going to love government service, but I do know that I don't want to be the only glaucoma person in half of a state. So I'm going to go to the FDA because that's research and that's cool. So that was a pivot that I made. I didn't realize it was going to then affect the rest of my life. Do you know what I'm saying? Because while I was while I was there, even, I really value the mission of the FDA. I think the FDA does not get the respect that it deserves for the value it provides to the American people.
So let me ask you a question. When you said that you weren't sure that you would like government service, what assumptions did you make, before you got to the FDA? What assumptions did you make that led you to that statement, that maybe it wasn't a fit for you? And then when you got there, were your assumptions proven right or wrong?
What I knew about the position was that it was in the devices division. MIGs were becoming a thing. There were no approved MIGs at the time, and I was going to be the medical officer who was responsible for reviewing all of those MIGs devices. And this was research that was specifically directed towards the patient population that I was interested in, my glaucoma people. So it was research, although it wasn't my own research. It was companies who were doing research to help my patient population. So there was inherently a nugget of it that I knew resonated for me. I had never, other than the Department of Natural Resources, I had never done government service before, so I didn't know if that act of governance, the being a government employee, was going to be my lifelong career. But I knew that I inherently found the topic interesting. So it was another situation where I pivoted away from something that, although I was trying to convince myself I wanted to be an active, hands-on, everyday surgeon, I really didn't want. It took me a long time to admit to myself that that was never going to be my life, being a surgeon and having my clinic and going to see patients every single day. That was never going to be the life that I was going to lead, because I inherently didn't want it. I wanted to do research. But, you do this whole program, right? You go through medical school, you do residency, fellowship, and you come out, and the track you're supposed to be on is you now, MD, PhD, you now go into an academic practice. Right. You have some research, you see your patients, you do your surgery, you're an academic physician. That it was hard for me to, in my mind, get over the fact that that's not what I wanted, but I wasn't a failure for not doing that. Once I accepted that there was a lot out there that I could do and use my education to help people without having to sit down there and touch an individual day after day, I could help thousands of people at the same time by doing what I was doing at the FDA. I got more comfortable with myself, and I got more comfortable with the fact that my pivot was a good choice. And I think kind of one of the points you're making, I've done all these pivots and I've taken this very twisty course. Every time I've made one of these pivots, I didn't necessarily know at the time that it was going to be the right choice, but in retrospect, I look back and it was the right choice. So,
and did you have like a formal process, or did you talk to your family, or did you talk to a colleague, or how did you vet these decisions? Or was it just kind of something that you just sat down and, with a cup of coffee and you just kind of made a checklist, A or B, and tallied it up?
David, I actually do make checklists. It's not to be a total nerd about it, but I will sit down with a piece of paper and I will make a pros and cons list. And that is how I help myself organize my thoughts. I am somebody who organizes their thoughts on paper with a pen. And I always have been. So I am a list maker. And that really helps me think about, are there more things in the pro column for A or for B? So I did actually make a list, yes. I mean, I spoke to mentors and my husband. So I have a process where I talk to people. Ultimately, the decision is mine, and I just have to sit down with myself and say, Margot, make a decision now, make a choice. And it's funny because I look back on everything that I've done since the beginning, even since since college. And I now know that I was deciding not to do things I didn't want, not necessarily knowing that I was going to love what I was doing, but I knew that there was a good chance that I would like it. And I'll tell you a little story. There was a time back in the beginning of my employment at Allergan. So, Allergan started out as Allergan version 1. We were acquired by Actavis, Allergan version 2. And then now, more recently, we were acquired by AbbVie, so we're Allergan version 3. Way back in the days of Allergan version 1, when I was relatively new there, I went to, I don't know how I ended up in this meeting, but it was David Pyatt, who was the head of Allergan at the time. And he was giving a talk to people who had come in from Latin American affiliates. And he gave this talk, entirely in Spanish, which was incredibly impressive, particularly given that, he has a Scottish accent. But he did the whole thing in Spanish, and it was fantastic. And at the end, there was a question period, fortunately in English. But he was asked the question, how did you know this is what you wanted to do? Like, how did you get to where you are? What kind of decision making did you do? And he sort of explained that his path was in a way very similar to the path that I had been experiencing myself. And he said something that just turned a light bulb on for me and has become one of the guiding principles of my life from that point. And it just made my whole life so clear. He said, sometimes it's almost better to know what you don't want than to know what you do want. And that was just an amazing statement that just made everything so clear.
So are you saying that was kind of like a philosophy you might have inadvertently been following that got you to AbbVie, and then he's just articulating it and it just kind of stuck to you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. He turned a light bulb on, and he made my whole pivot and decision-making process so clear to me that my underlying decision-making process was not, I don't necessarily know what I want here, but I know what I don't want, and I'm not going to do what I don't want. So I'm going to try this other thing out. And I've learned through all of these pivots and all of these changes that if I try that thing out and I don't like it, I don't have to stay. Because as I have developed through industry and I've developed through all of these experiences that I've had, the FDA, which I did love, but had good life reasons for making a change, which I can obviously share if you want. And, through industry, I have realized that there are so many options out there for somebody like me. We don't have to take the A, B, C pathway that is expected of us when we go to medical school. We can take a to C to X pathway if we want to. It's all a matter of keeping your eyes open, being open to the possibilities, listening to what people say, and just seeing what's out there. And that is kind of how I did it. I don't want to do this. Is there something else I think might be cool or I might like better? Let's do that. I have gotten to a place in my life where I know I am in the right place, and I have made good decisions by going, towards going away from something I know I didn't want.
So that you led me exactly to where I was going, which is, what is it about working in industry that clicks with you so much that you've had all these different experiences that most people wouldn't have in 3 or 4 lifetimes? You were in a big academic institution, you were at big government, and now in industry. What is it about industry that just clicks with you, that gets you excited?
I love the fact that what I do every day, although I'm not actively seeing patients, I'm helping my colleagues and I'm helping my patient population every single day with what I do. I love that I get to work on a number of different projects at the same time. I'm working on new and innovative products. I'm on any given day, I might be doing very early work where, we're talking about how we're going to do something. I might be doing later work talking about a product that's already approved. All of it being a way for us, or for me, to use my creativity and use the experience that I've had to make products that help people and to help my colleagues, i.e. my colleagues in the field, you, other clinicians, help the patients themselves. So I feel like what I am doing here has a breadth to it that is so much bigger than I ever expected when I started working in industry. And it just feels like home, and it feels like where I should be. And I love analyzing new information, and I love creating new products. And I've done some work here that I'm really, really proud of. And it just feels like I found my place. This is what I always should have been doing. I just didn't know.
Well, I think that there's so many take-home lessons that someone can get from your career path and your willingness to kind of change and embrace change. And I think anyone who's gone through any significant change in their life understands how uncomfortable it is and how you don't want to do it. And sometimes it's easier just to, keep going on the straight and narrow. So just for me, that point was starting my own practice rather than being in a big retina group. And it was at times painful, and it was a big pivot point, but it turned out to be great. And I don't think I could have gotten there without first had that experience at the large private group. And I think I'm at least in my mind, I'm hearing similar kind of things from you.
Yes, absolutely. And it must have been at least a little bit terrifying for you to go it on your own, not having done that before and not really knowing what the future was going to hold.
Well, I think just as terrifying, I would say, is going from, a huge academic institution to the FDA, which is really, you would know better than me, but it seems they probably practice medicine quite different, and the day-to-day is quite different. And then going into industry is also, these are huge career changes that are it's just so impressive that you've been able to do all that and be successful along the way.
That is very kind of you to say. It is a learning process. Everything's a learning process. Just like when you left a practice and struck out on your own, you had to learn, how does one function as the solo practitioner? How does one run a business? How do I do this? And am I doing the right thing? And, I had to go through the same learning process. I didn't know how to do clinical development when I came to this company 13 years ago, but I knew I had the foundations. I knew glaucoma. I knew ophthalmology. I had done a ton of research already. I had a PhD. So it was a different kind of research I was doing. It was on the other side of the table from where I was at the FDA. But I had a foundation that helped me have the capacity to learn how to do it and learn it fast. And I think people like us, we're so highly trained, and we spend so much time in school and developing the talents that we have. I honestly believe that people like you, people like me, we can do almost anything. We just have to believe that we are almost, in a way, allowed to do it, that it's a valid opportunity, that it's a reasonable choice. And particularly for me, being a woman, I have to also overcome a little bit of your standard imposter syndrome, and I'm not ready, I'm not prepared. I am ready, and I am prepared. And so, I honestly believe that if, my boss came to me tomorrow and said, start up a new thing, this is what I want you to do, come back to me with an idea, and it's something that I've never worked on before, I can do it. I know how to read. I know how to do research. I know how to bulk myself up, right? So I figure it out and I do it. And I think it's possible that those of us who are so highly trained, sometimes we get stuck in a little box and we think this box is the only box that I can ever be in, but that's not true. There's a lot of ways we can go, and sometimes we could be in a number of different boxes. We just happen to be in that one, and if you're not happy with that box, you find another box.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for sharing your career trajectory and your lessons that you learned along the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Margot Goodkin, for joining us today and talking to us about the importance of flexibility in career development, practical lessons from ophthalmology work in government, industry, and academics. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, simply share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.